introduction. It's great to see you outside of the bathroom. And thank you all for having me here. It's been a true honor. I've been traveling all over the state. I was in Amarillo and Wichita Falls a couple weeks ago. Went over to Beaumont, went down to South Texas and Corpus Christi, and then I went to Houston last weekend, spent the whole weekend doing a bunch of different events. And I've been up here in the Metroplex this weekend, Fort Worth and Richardson and South Dallas, and now up here to Frisco. And so thank you all for your hospitality and welcoming me here. I don't think people around the country recognize how close we are to turning Texas blue. Donald Trump won this state by only 5 points in 2020. Ted Cruz won his last race by only 2.5 points in 2018. Texas is the biggest battleground state in the country. And this year we've got an incredible candidate leading the top of our ticket in the state, my friend Colin Allred. Yes. Colin, as y'all probably know, Colin played football at Baylor before becoming a voting rights lawyer. And now he's a U.S. Congress fighting every day to give every Texan the chance to chase their version of the American dream. And now he's running against the worst senator in America. On January 6th, Ted Cruz plotted to overturn the 2020 election and fan the flames of insurrection. During the blackout that killed 700 of our fellow Texans, Ted Cruz hopped on a flight to Cancun, leaving his constituents and his own dog to shiver in the dark. And when Donald Trump called Heidi Cruz ugly, Ted Cruz endorsed him anyway. If Ted Cruz will abandon his wife, his dog, and his country, what makes you think he won't abandon you? Colin Allred will never abandon Texas, and he will never abandon you. Right-wing extremists like Ted Cruz have taken over our state. And it's time to take Texas back. Yes. These extremists have given our state a bad name all over the country, all over the world. I'm an 8th generation Texan. My family's been here since it was Mexico. And I remember that we Texans used to be known for our hospitality. Our nickname is the Friendly State. If you look up our official state motto, it's friendship. The word Texas comes from the Caddo Native American word for friend. But what's interesting is that they didn't use that word to describe a friend in their own tribe. They used it to describe a friend in a different tribe. Friendship across lines of difference. Friendship amidst diversity. That's what makes Texas so great. We're this big, beautiful mashup of all these different people and all these different cultures. I told you I was in Corpus Christi, and we had an event right there on the water. And after it was over, I was able to walk over to the Selena Memorial. If you've never visited the statue, I encourage you to do so. And I was thinking that when you listen to a Selena song, you're hearing Spanish vocal styles from northern Mexico, but you're also hearing polka dance rhythms from Czech and German immigrants. This uniquely Texan ability to welcome new friends, welcome new ideas, has made us one of the most exciting and innovative states in the country. We're the state that put a man on the moon. We're the state that pioneered ranching and energy and computers. We're the state that gave this country Barbara Jordan, Ann Richards, LBJ, and James Fire. We're the state that put breakfast in a taco. And we are still developing new technologies, new industries, new art. Our own Beyonce just came out with a country album. Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick, they don't understand Texas or what makes us great. Shutting down diversity programs at colleges and universities, a total abortion ban, anti-immigrant laws, Christian nationalism. In the words of the great Beyonce Knowles, this ain't Texas. And I want to focus for a second on this abortion ban because my constituents are reeling from this deadly policy every day. When Donald Trump overturned Roe v. Wade, Texas Republicans at our state capitol, my colleagues, voted to ban abortion even in cases of rape, incest, and threats to the woman's health. Since that day, 26,000 Texas women have been forced to give birth to their rapist baby. Infant and maternal mortality have spiked. Pregnant women with life-threatening complications are being told to wait in emergency room parking lots until they go into sepsis. This has never been about life. This has always been about controlling women. In some Texas counties, Republican politicians are banning women from using public highways to travel out of state to get an abortion. Donald Trump is saying he's going to let red states monitor women's pregnancies. And if you haven't read the latest Texas GOP platform, it calls for the death penalty for any woman who gets an abortion in this state. Republican extremism is killing women right here in Texas. And now they're promising to take these deadly policies nationwide. And if they win in November, God help us. Outside of abortion, there are probably two things that people around the country have heard about Texas lately. Private school voucher stamps and Ken Paxton. And those two things are very much related. So in May of last year, a bipartisan coalition of Republicans and Democrats in the Texas House voted to impeach our corrupt Attorney General. But then just a couple months later, the Texas Senate voted to acquit Ken Paxton on all charges, restoring the most corrupt politician in our state to the office of top cop. But just weeks before that impeachment trial in the Senate, our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who was supposed to preside impartially over that trial, took $3 million from two of Ken Paxton's billionaire buddies, Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks. Those two billionaire megadonors are the exact same billionaire megadonors who are funding this effort to privatize our public schools with a voucher stamp. When you open the newspaper or you turn on the TV, you see the politicians, Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz and Dan Patrick, but you don't always see the billionaire puppet masters who are pulling the strings behind the scenes. Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, they're oil and gas oligarchs, but they are also Christian nationalist pastors. I know billionaire pastor sounds like an oxymoron, but on Sunday mornings, these two billionaires are preaching at far-right churches. And they don't preach a theology of universal love like the kind many of us were brought up with. They preach a theology of power, control, domination. They say climate change is God's will. They say homosexuality is the same thing as pedophilia. They say only Christians have a right to serve in public office. In fact, they told the former Republican Speaker of the Texas House, a guy named Joe Strauss, that he didn't have a right to be Speaker because he's Jewish. I know this term Christian nationalism is new for some of us. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas. I've been going to the same church since I was 2 years old. I'm now in seminary, studying to become a minister myself. My faith means more to me than anything. So let me say this as clearly as I can. There is nothing Christian about Christian nationalism. It is the worship of power, social power, economic power, political power in the name of Christ. And it is a betrayal of Jesus of Nazareth. Have you ever noticed that it's the politicians who talk the most about being a Christian who are the least Christ-like? You can't call yourself a Christian and deny health care to the sick. You can't call yourself a Christian and cut food stamps for the poor. You can't call yourself a Christian and reject the stranger seeking asylum at our southern border. You can't call yourself a Christian and destroy God's creation by polluting our air and our water. And you certainly can't call yourself a Christian and discriminate against your neighbor because of their race, gender, or sexual orientation. I personally know plenty of Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and atheists who are more Christ-like than some of the self-proclaimed Christian servants left out. But the scariest part about Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks is not their toxic theology, it's that they're turning that toxic theology into law. They are spending their vast fortunes transforming our beloved Texas into an authoritarian theocracy. I don't think you realize how much these two billionaires control our state government. A majority of Republicans in the Texas House have taken their money. And get this, every single Republican state senator has taken their money. But they don't just buy politicians, they fund a sprawling network of right-wing think tanks and advocacy organizations and media outlets. They are attempting, with their millions of dollars, to destroy democracy in the second largest state in the country. This is the biggest story in American politics, and not enough people are talking about it. And just like Dan Patrick did their bidding in the Ken Paxton impeachment trial, Greg Abbott has done their bidding by calling special session after special session to pass their private school voucher scam. If they are trying to destroy democracy, the last thing they want is an honest attorney general. The last thing they want are well-funded public schools that teach the next generation how to think for themselves. Those are obstacles on their way to theocracy. Those who are close to them say that their ultimate goal is to replace public education with private religious schooling for everyone. And now some of you are thinking, that's not going to happen. That's what we said about abortion. And then 50 years later, it was gone. So I'd be careful about taking public education for granted. They're playing for keeps. They're playing the long game. We have got to know what we are up against. We are not up against Ted Cruz and Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick. We're up against the big money that is fueling this far-right shift in our state. But there is good news. Because on the Friday before Thanksgiving last year, a bipartisan coalition of Republicans and Democrats in the Texas House defeated their voucher scam on the floor. And that's actually not news, because the first voucher scam in this state was proposed in 1957. For the history buffs in the room, you know that was just 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down from the Supreme Court. That first voucher scam was a deliberate attempt to resegregate public schools, to allow white students to leave newly integrated schools to go to white-only private schools. But every decade they've been brought up since '57, Texans have said no, because Texans love their public schools. It's enshrined in our state's constitution. And there's nothing more Texan than Friday Night Lights. And I don't just say that because football is great. Of course, football is great. But it's because schools are about a lot more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. They bring us together. In a time when we are so polarized, when we're so disconnected from one another, schools are one of the last places where we come together. That's why they're a threat to the enemies of democracy, because they want to pull us apart. Vouchers do not improve student performance. There have been a lot of states who have tried voucher scams, but they do siphon off billions of dollars from already underfunded public schools because that's the point. That's the purpose. These voucher scams are part of a coordinated effort by wealthy special interests to dismantle public education in this state and this country. Before I was a politician, I was a public school teacher. I taught at Rhodes Middle School on the west side of San Antonio. I often say that teaching middle school is the best preparation for serving in the Texas legislature. The west side of San Antonio is a beautiful and historic Mexican-American neighborhood. It's also one of the poorest zip codes in the state of Texas. I taught in a severely underfunded public school. I taught 45 kids in one classroom. There weren't enough desks for all of my students, so I had kids sitting on the air conditioning unit. In the wealthiest country in human history, in the 21st century, children sitting on the air conditioning unit. Texas ranks 43rd in the nation in per student education funding. Texas teachers are making less than they did 10 years ago when you adjust for inflation. Local property taxpayers are trying to stop the bleeding at the local level while the state government fails to do its fair share of school funding. We have a school funding emergency in this state, and it is the fault of one man, Governor Greg Abbott. We had a $33 billion budget surplus last year. Billion with a B. And do you know how much Greg Abbott chose to spend on our students, on our teachers, and on our schools? Zero. Unconscionable. Immoral. Unacceptable. That's what's at stake in this election. Greg Abbott must pay a price at the ballot box for that decision. And I'm hearing from teachers and parents across the state who are ready to send a message to Greg Abbott this November. But they are not just coming for our schools. They are coming for our health care. And this is personal for me. When I first ran for this office, I almost died. I was a healthy 28-year-old running for the Texas House. I was running in a red district as a Democrat, and I was a little behind, so I decided to do kind of a stunt. And I walked across the entire length of my district, 25 miles in one day, holding town halls along the way. About halfway through that walk, I started to feel fatigued and nauseous. I thought I was dehydrated. I threw up a couple times on the walk, but somehow I finished. I don't know how I finished, but I did. I went home, I went to bed, and I slept for 36 hours straight. My parents got concerned and they took me to the ER, where nurses checked my blood sugar. I don't think I'd ever had my blood sugar tested before. They told me a normal blood sugar is below 100. Mine was 900. They immediately diagnosed me with type 1 diabetes. I was in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis, which leads to coma and death without insulin. I was lucky to be alive. When I got out of the ICU, I went to Walgreens to pick up my first 30-day supply of insulin, this new medicine that I now needed to live. And it cost me $684. Many Texans with diabetes cannot afford their insulin, so they ration or skip doses, and some of them die because of it. All because Big Pharma has manipulated and monopolized the global insulin market, jacking up prices to maximize profit. So when I won that race, and I got to the state capitol, I worked across the aisle with my Republican colleagues, and I passed a bill that caps insulin copays in the state of Texas at $25 per prescription. And then Joe Biden and Kamala Harris capped insulin at $35 for Medicare recipients. We have done good work fighting Big Pharma in this state and this country. But Project 2025 threatens to undo that progress. If Trump wins, he's going to let Big Pharma jack up prices again. But as Vice President Harris is fond of saying, we are not going back. These are the stakes of this election. Our schools, our healthcare, our freedoms are all on the line. You know, I won that race in 2018. I flipped a red district to blue. 2 years before I ran, my district voted for Donald Trump for president. So I couldn't just win with Democrats. I had to build a Big Tent that included Democrats, independents, and some Republicans. So I want to share some things I learned from flipping a district, because I think it's relevant to the work that we're doing here in Frisco. A lot of Democrats think that people vote with their brains, but they don't. We don't. We vote with our hearts and our guts. Our policy proposals, our 12-point plans, they're important. But Democrats, we've got to start talking about our values. Because the Republican Party claims to be the party of freedom, family, and faith. But we know that you can't be the party of freedom and control women's bodies. You can't be the party of family and love your guns more than our kids. And you can't be the party of faith and worship at the feet of Donald Trump. The Republican Party is not the party of freedom, family, and faith. They are the party of bullies, bigots, and billionaires. And it's exactly why we have to defeat them this November. I am confident that with the candidates in this room, with Colin Allred and Kamala Harris leading the way at the top of the ticket, and with the organizers that I see in front of me, we are going to move this beautiful state and this beautiful country forward come November. Thank you so much for having me.